green cards that went unused in the years since 1992. Under current law, any allotted green cards not issued by the end of the year become unavailable for the following year. In 2021, the U.S. failed to issue some 80,000 green cards due to processing delays, and those cards have now gone to waste. Another provision would allow people who have been waiting to be issued a green card for at least 2 years to pay additional fees to bypass certain annual and per-country limitations and become permanent resident years, if not decades, sooner than they would have otherwise. And it would preserve green cards for diversity visa winners from countries with low levels of immigration to the U.S. who were prevented from entering the country on account of Trump-era travel bans and the pandemic. Beyond those provisions, there probably won't be any more movement on immigration for the foreseeable future in Congress, and it remains an open question whether any of the alternatives can pass muster with the parliamentarian. Okay, so that's, keep that stuff in mind. It's tempting for me to say, vote for this person or don't vote for that person. I can't do that. FCC requirements, which makes sense. I wouldn't want other radio shows being on here saying who they think you should vote for. But I'm telling you what to think about. That's it. Just think about this stuff, because there are forces at work that make these things happen. They don't just happen on their own, and they don't necessarily happen because politicians are just like feckless and they don't, they make promises and then they don't care and they don't even do anything. It's like, oh, I got elected, so now I don't have to worry about it. Sometimes that does happen. But for a lot of these things, for most of these things, what happens is they make a promise as in, I am going to try to do this. Only they'll say it like, I am going to do this. Vote for me and I will do this. Which is bad, and they shouldn't do that. Let's put it that way. Because what it really means is vote for me and I'm going to try to do this. And then once they get in there, they find out why that's maybe harder than it looked from the outside, or why it may be impossible no matter how you try it. So that's what you end up with. It's hard to explain. Anyway, I've already said it. I'm just repeating myself here, but just be aware of this stuff. Look behind the scenes. Take a little extra time to figure out what's actually going on and who's actually doing what before you just make blanket assumptions about who you like or don't like in politics, because there's a lot of this stuff. I mean, a lot of people were like, yeah, Trump's a man of the people. He's looking out for us blue collar folks. Trump never looked out for any blue collar person ever. Not once the whole time he was in office. I can talk about him like this now because he's not anybody. He's just some old dude. So I am unchained with Trump. Not that I was ever all that chained with him in the past, but I'm unchained with him now. I mean, he looked out for rich people and rich people's interests and his own interests, and that's all he did. But there are people that still voted for him because he said the stuff they wanted to hear. So look at what they're doing, not necessarily what they're saying. And look at what they're trying to do, not necessarily what they're doing. So this is in this order. Listen to what they say and say, okay, I like that or I don't like that. Then look at what they do or don't do and go, oh, okay, this is who they are kind of. This is how they are. And then look at what they're trying to do or trying not to do. And you add 2 and 3 together and you will find out who they really are. And then you can ignore what they say because they're politicians and they say what they think you want to hear. So, moving on. Next article. Biden administration asks Supreme Court to let it end Trump-era Remain in Mexico immigration policy. Remember about that policy that's like, oh, well, Biden didn't end it. He said he would end it, and he didn't. Here's why. So the Biden administration on Wednesday asked the Supreme Court for permission to end the Trump-era Remain in Mexico program, which requires non-Mexican migrants to stay in Mexico until their U.S. immigration court dates. In August, a federal judge in Texas ordered the revival of the policy after the Department of Homeland Security attempted to end the program. An appeals court also ruled against the administration, which began to re-implement the program earlier this month. Under former President Donald Trump, thousands of migrants were subject to the program, formerly known as Migrant Protection Protocols, which has resulted in people living in makeshift camps along Mexico's northern border, often in squalor and dangerous conditions. In short, the lower courts have commanded DHS to implement and enforce the short-lived and controversial MPP program in perpetuity, and they have done so despite determinations by the politically accountable executive branch that MPP is not the best tool for deterring unlawful migration, that MPP exposes migrants to unacceptable risks, and that MPP detracts from the executive's foreign relations efforts to manage regional migration, the administration wrote to the justices. The filing also requests that the Supreme Court review the case this term, arguing that the appeals court ruling threatens to disrupt other cases where the government's policies on issues like immigration, detention, and parole are challenged. Delaying review until next term would likely postpone resolution of those critical issues until sometime in 2023. In the meantime, the government would be forced to continue negotiating with Mexico to maintain a controversial program that it has already twice determined is no longer in the best interests of the United States, the filing reads. The Supreme Court previously denied a request from the administration that the program's revival remain on hold while the case was appealed. When the federal appeals court blocked President Joe Biden's attempt to end the immigration program, it said the administration's efforts did not comply with the Administrative Procedure Act, which sets out specific processes that agencies must go through in unveiling new policies. The court also said the effort violated an immigration law that says non-citizens shall be detained or returned to the countries from where they arrived while their immigration proceedings move forward. Okay, so for example, if you want another example of this, Trump tried throughout his presidency to end the DACA program in one way or another. Never quite managed to do it, although he got pretty far with it. After 4 years, he got pretty far with it. He also tried very hard to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, as we know it. And he didn't manage to do it. So this is a similar situation. Trump was trying really hard to get rid of those things. But for various reasons, that didn't work. Okay, Biden is trying really hard to get rid of this. And so far, for various reasons, that hasn't worked. But that doesn't mean that he's not trying. Okay, just be aware of it. Be aware of why these things are happening. I know I keep saying this over and over again, but, I see it too often. And amongst people that I work with, fellow activists in the immigration thing will say, they don't, they'll just mumble and grumble and say all this stuff. It's like, be aware of what they're trying to do. Be aware of what they do and be aware of what they try to do and vote for that. Don't necessarily vote for only what they say or only what they do, because that doesn't tell you the whole story. And also, vote. First off, just vote. Go vote. Every election, every chance you have to vote, do it. Because it's way too late. By the time you're reading the news or, whatever, and you're just complaining about things and saying, this blah, 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 it's way too late, because this person is already there. They're already doing what they do. They already have the opportunity to make changes that you maybe don't like or don't want, or you obviously don't like because you're complaining about it. So that's not the time to be thinking about these things. The time to be thinking about them is before they happen, is trying to get people that will do the stuff that you think should be done. That's why you vote. And second point, sorry, 2 points, except that you can't see them because my fingers are in parallel. The other point is try to get people that are in the general direction of what you want. So I have lots of revolutionary kinds of friends, anarchy kinds of friends, anarchist, I should say, kinds of friends, and so on, who are just like, burn down the system. We need, it doesn't matter. You're not making enough change. We need this big change. We don't need this small change. Well, in between this big change and where you are now, are small changes. And you want to be pushing in the direction that you want to end up in, even if you're only getting there by millimeters. Why? What's the point of that? Because it's something you can do and it doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't take away from anything you're trying to do. You're trying to start a revolution. Okay, try and start a revolution. But in the meantime, while you're doing that, keep pushing in that direction. Because this all or nothing attitude is what makes people become just cynical and they just give up. It's like, I didn't get everything I wanted, so what's the point? It's like a little kid going, well, I wanted a PlayStation for Christmas and I didn't get one, so I don't care about these 15 other gifts that I got. Well, maybe those 15 other gifts were not as exciting. Like you got socks and, maybe some crayons or whatever. You got a bunch of stuff that is kind of cool. It might be fun. But it wasn't the PlayStation. So screw it. Just throw it all away. No, that's not how it works. I mean, that might be how it works in the brain of a 5-year-old, but that's not how it works in the real world. And we're adults living in the real world, hopefully. And we've got to realize that change does not happen overnight except under extraordinary circumstances. And when that does happen, also a lot of strange stuff comes along with it that you don't necessarily want. So you have to be very careful with gigantic changes because they are unpredictable. So if your change happened tomorrow, whatever that change would be, let's say abolish the police. Police system is corrupt, yes. It's based on, protection of and perpetuation of power for those already in power, yes. There are lots of bad cops out there, yes. If you abolish the police tomorrow, would it be a big problem? Yes, it would. So think about these things. Be realistic. Yeah, you want to eventually change that system into something that works more equitably for everybody. I do too. I would like to. But I also would like to not see what would happen if we just suddenly overnight said, okay, let's do it. Let's just get rid of them. No more police. There's no more police. There are laws, but there's no one who enforces those laws. So what happens? Think about it. Think about it realistically. What would happen if you did that tomorrow? And that's what I'm getting at with these big changes and why voting is so important. You can't bring in someone that's just going to utterly transform things overnight. So if, for example, for my more lefty friends, if Bernie had won, Bernie Sanders was president right now, how different would you think things would be? Assuming that everything else were the same. We had a 50-50 Senate and a slight margin in the House. How different would it be right now? I would argue it wouldn't be that different, and it might not even be as good. Why? Not because Bernie wouldn't be pushing harder than Biden is in ways that we would want him to push, but because he might be less successful at it because there would be people pushing back harder because he's pushing harder. See what I mean? So, it might be better. I'm not saying it wouldn't be. I'm not saying absolutely there's no way it would be. I'm just saying it might not be, and it might be worse. So you have to be aware that drastic change, like Trump was dramatic change. Let's face it, he was a change maker. And he came in and he just was like a wrecking ball all over the place. And you saw how that worked. And it was a big mess, a super big mess. And it was dangerous. And it was all sorts of crazy and all sorts of problems. And historians are going to look back on that if the country survives into the future. Historians, or even if it doesn't, I guess, historians are going to come back and look on that and say this was, a terrible, oops, lights went out, a terrible thing to have happened. It was a disaster, even for the people that really liked what he was doing. It has proven to be a disaster. So I'm not saying be careful what you wish for. Wish for anything you want to wish for. That's fine. Go ahead. Wish for the moon if that's what you have in mind. But be aware that change is a dangerous thing. And I'm not saying don't do it. We need to change. Change is growth. Growth is evolution. Growth is life. Without change, you stop being alive. You just stagnate and die. But it is also a dangerous thing, and it has to be done carefully in order to make good, positive changes and lasting positive results. It has to be done carefully. And I'm not saying, no, we have to move slowly. No, we can't make big. We can push for big things. I'm not arguing against that. I'm just saying be aware of how things actually work, about how change in your life actually works. How many times have you said, I'm going to start today and do everything differently, and then you end up just doing the same stuff? That's because inertia is really powerful. It pushes you forward, and it pushes you to continue doing what you've been doing because all that energy and all that history is behind that, and you just keep going in that direction. So the things, at least in my life, maybe it's just me, but in my life, the things that have resulted in permanent change have been a bit less ambitious than the things that resulted in a week of, hey, I'm going to work out for 6 hours and run 10 miles every morning. That will last like maybe a week if you're lucky. So the stuff that's realistic, I guess that's what I'm saying. I feel like I'm bouncing around on this point. My point is that being realistic about things is super important. That's not to be cynical. That's not, anything like that. It is simply to say what seems likely and possible. Let's look at our situation, where we are right now. What is the thing that seems like, yeah, you could do that. That could happen. That seems realistic. That's where you should put your energy. And each time you make one of those changes, that will make other things, adjacent topics, more realistic than they were a moment before. So it's really how much energy and effort you're willing to put into it, because change requires energy. So do the thing that seems the most realistic, and then look at your next options, which open up because you have achieved this one thing. Then these 2 or 3 things become possible, probable. Then you can do one of those, choose 1 or 2 of those, do those, and that opens up other possibilities. So each little door you open, creates more possibilities. And each possibility creates more possibilities beyond that. And that's how you get somewhere. It's like a journey. You can't say, I want to be in Chicago, and then leap and suddenly you're in Chicago. Maybe someday we'll come up with a way of doing that. But right now we can't. So it's, I want to be in Chicago. take a step towards Chicago, start moving north, find a car, get in a train, do something. These things are steps. There are steps to get from here to there. And each step you take that brings you closer to there makes getting there more possible, more probable. That's what I'm talking about. That's my point. So yeah, I've gone over and over it, and I will just don't need to keep going over it, so I won't. Okay, how about this one? We'll change of pace here. From NPR, fewer immigrant workers are coming to fill key jobs. That has slowed the U.S. economy. Big surprise. From the moment you walk through the door of Jagdeep Nayar's restaurant near Iowa 81 in central Pennsylvania, it's clear who his customers are. The cashier's stand is fashioned from the front panel of a real Tata truck, the best-selling brand in India. Oh, there's a picture of it there. Wow, interesting. Every American food is available on every exit, Nayar tells NPR in an interview. So it came to my mind, why not open an Indian restaurant? A few years ago, Nayar closed the Subway franchise that used to occupy this truck stop near Harrisburg and Hershey and opened My Taste of India. It's one of a growing number of roadside restaurants around the country that cater primarily to truckers with roots in the northwest Indian state of Punjab. Employers in the U.S. are struggling to fill roughly 11 million open jobs. The pandemic gets most of the blame, but there's a related factor that gets less attention. Fewer immigrants are coming to fill those jobs, particularly in some key industries that keep the economy moving. The U.S. economy is missing more than 1 million immigrant workers because of the pandemic. If you can't get the key workers you need, the whole industry slows down and the whole economy slows down, says Jeremy Robbins, executive director of the American Immigration Council. Robbins says the U.S. economy is missing more than 1 million immigrant workers who would otherwise be here were it not for the pandemic and steep cuts to legal immigration during the Trump administration. And he argues that slowdown in immigration may be contributing to supply chain problems and inflation as employers struggle to find more workers. That has a real impact, Robbins says in an interview, not just on workers themselves and not just on the industries that they're going to work on, but on the whole economy. Some industries may be feeling this shortage even more acutely. The food service and healthcare industries, which both depend heavily on immigrant workers, have more than 1 million open jobs. There are hundreds of thousands of openings in the trucking and warehousing industry, where roughly 1 in 5 workers are foreign-born. Punjabis have taken to trucking in a big way, making up as much as 1/5 of the industry in the U.S. On a recent evening, a steady stream of Punjabi drivers pulled over for dinner at My Taste of India. I just stopped for the food. Here is a good Punjabi restaurant, says Gurtag Singh on his way to Kentucky. Everything they make, very nice. Singh has only been driving a truck for 15 months, he said, but he has already learned where to find roadside restaurants all over the country through word of mouth. The Punjabi community getting into the trucking is like an... That doesn't make sense. Okay, let me try that again. The Punjabi community getting into the trucking is like enormous numbers. Okay, this is someone who's not a native English speaker. Okay, let me try that again. The Punjabi community getting into the trucking is like enormous numbers, says Raman Singh Dhilan, the head of the North American Punjabi Trucking Association. It's in the blood. In Fresno, California, where Dhilan lives, there's a long-standing Punjabi community. Over the past decade, Dhilan says, Punjabis have taken to trucking in a big way and now make up as much as 1/5 of the industry nationwide. But Dhilan says that growth has been limited in the last few years as the coronavirus put the brakes on the U.S. immigration system. There's a whole lot of people that should have entered the country legally who were not able to enter. I have several people around me that their family members are stuck in India because their interviews are not done, he says. And a lot of these newcomers, when they come in, their preferred industry to join is trucking. It's widely agreed that fewer immigrants entering the U.S. labor force last year, but not everyone thinks it's a problem. Immigration restrictionists welcome the slowdown. My point is, that's good. Labor tightness is good, says Roy Beck, the founder and president of Numbers USA, a nonprofit in the Washington, D.C. area that pushes for lower levels of immigration, and the author of a new book called Back of the Hiring Line, a 200-year history of immigration surges, employer bias, and depression of black wealth. It is proven that you tighten the labor market and wages go up. It always happens, Beck says. The fact that we had 1 year of less immigration contributed to that, and that's good. It's one of the most positive things that could happen for tackling economic inequality. Beck argues that too much immigration hurts native-born workers, particularly those with less education, though many economists say the effect is small. By all accounts, there are other bigger reasons for the current labor shortage, with millions of workers retiring or reluctant to come back to work during the pandemic. But it would be a mistake to ignore the effects of immigration, says Kartik Ramakrishnan, who teaches public policy at the University of California, Riverside. If you had a slowdown in immigration, where there's a very little demand for labor, you're not going to see that much of an effect, Ramakrishnan says. But right now, with millions of job openings, Ramakrishnan says there is a lot of demand for labor. So absolutely, the slowdown of immigration is making a difference, he says. The absent immigrants would fill all these open jobs, but the absent immigrants wouldn't fill all of these open jobs, he says, but they might help. Okay, sorry. When I talk for a while, it just becomes like my mouth stops working, my throat stops working. It's like my entire speaking apparatus just kind of goes, yeah, I'm okay, I'm done. It just nopes out on me, and I just get like unable to continue. I don't know. We're reaching the end of our program here. I guess I just want to say we're starting off a new year. At the present, things, if we ignore the pandemic, which is hard to do because it's kind of omnipresent and its effects, like we noticed in that last article, are everywhere. They're just connected to everything. It's like it's got tentacles going in every direction, and it touches everything and changes everything and affects everything. So it's kind of hard to ignore it. But, we're trying. We're trying to get better. We're trying to do good things. We're trying to make stuff happen. People are trying in different ways, and it's both good and bad. Some of the ways that people are trying are not good things at all. Like they're saying, let's just ignore it and go without masks and have big parties and do stuff. That's not a good idea. But be that as it may, people are trying to get there and to improve the world. And I appreciate that. At the start of a new year, it's always an opportunity to say, hey, let's just make stuff happen this year. Let's get there. Let's do it. And so I'm going to be hopeful. I honestly don't have high hopes in terms of just what seems realistic and probable, but I'm going to be hopeful that we're going to make some positive difference in the coming year. And I hope you do too. And that's all I have to say for now. Thank you for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.